Stories shape how we see the world. Voice of Witness is an award-winning oral history nonprofit harnessing the transformative power of storytelling. We work with individuals and communities impacted by injustice, helping them document their lived experiences through oral history, telling their own stories in their own words. In an era of reductive sound bites, we need this kind of nuanced grassroots storytelling to create a more just future. Visit voiceofwitness.org/learn to get involved, check out our workshops, and download tools to support your own project. Join us in building a more connected world, one story at a time.
Hi, I'm Rashmi Sajani, founder of Girls Who Code. Look, I'd consider myself a pretty successful adult woman. I've written books, founded 2 successful nonprofits, and I'm raising 2 incredible kids. But here's the thing. I still wake up wondering, is this it? And if the best years are yet to come, when's that going to start? Join me on My So-Called Midlife, my new podcast with Lemonada Media, where we're building a playbook for navigating midlife, one episode at a time. Each week, I'll chat with extraordinary guests who've transformed their midlife crisis into opportunities for growth and newfound purpose. At some point, we all ask ourselves, is there more to life? I'm here to discover how to thrive in my second act, right alongside you. My So-Called Midlife is out now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Lemonada.
Hello and welcome to Good Things. I'm your host, Maya Rupert. Today, we're diving into part 1 of our 2-part series about using storytelling as a tool for both resistance and belonging. Stories have the power to help us challenge, shape, and navigate our democracy. And the voices we choose to elevate really matter. That's why I'm so honored. Our first guest is Ashley Hemmers, an enrolled member of the Fort Mojave Indian Tribe and the tribal administrator for her nation. She went from growing up on her reservation to graduating from Yale, and then chose to return home to work with her tribe. It's a journey she shared in an oral history with Voice of Witness, a nonprofit that amplifies stories of people impacted by and fighting against injustice. And as you'll hear, that journey has given her a powerful perspective on bridging different worlds. That's a lot of good things happening. Ashley, welcome to Good Things. So in preparation for this interview, I got to learn a lot about your story. And one of the things that really stood out to me is that you like to start off every day having breakfast with your grandma. And I thought that was just really beautiful and powerful. And if we can just sort of start off, how was that this morning?
Yeah, I mean, today was Friday. We had eggs and tortillas. It was awesome. She had her coffee, and it's cooling down here in the desert, which is great. Yes. But it's still at the 100-degree mark. But a cooler morning is definitely really good. So we were able to enjoy that this morning.
I love that. So I want to turn and talk a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind sharing, just what it was like growing up in Fort Mojave. Are there like any memories that you can share, again, that just sort of stick with you from your childhood?
Yeah, I live less than a mile from the river, the Colorado River. My family home is there. So, I remember things like walking to the river and that being totally normal and going swimming all day.
Yeah.
And I remember having open skies. Obviously, my work is today breaking intergenerational cycles of poverty on my reservation. But also I think about the opposite side of that we had more flexibility in that we didn't have this constant fear that someone was going to buy cheap land next to us and put up a distribution center or a gas plant or a marijuana distribution center or whatever it is for whatever time. We didn't have to think about that. And I think it's a very important topic because it's throwing It's throwing youth directly under me into a new environment that they wouldn't have grown up with otherwise.
Right. I think that is such an interesting point that I think that there's a way we think about encroachment that maybe really does only call back to what it used to look like. And what you're describing is it's going to start looking different. And I think there's a misalignment there that you're right. I don't hear people talking about it this way, but we need to as it shifts.
Yeah. And I think for us, like, Native people are living here presently too. I was born at the same time that you were probably born in, like, it's not like we're these historic figments of like, stay away from my land. But there is a reckoning that has to happen and a responsibility that has to happen that doesn't have to be an either or. It could be, I do this because of this, right? But you can't just omit the shared history and think that no one's here.
Right. I think there is a way that we can talk about this that recognizes exactly this is not either or, it's not black and white. Any solution is going to have to be sort of shades of gray. But I think that there are moments, right, where we need to be able to take a stand against something, right? Like I'm thinking about, in your oral history, you talk about when the Department of Interior and Ecology had plans to dig trenches and dispose of nuclear waste at Ward Valley. And this was like back in the 90s, right?
In California.
Yes. And I want to read what you say. You hear these stories when you're a kid of the longest walk or Sitting Bull, of all these big phantom Indians. And here we were, a group of Indians, our leaders, our chairmen, people we knew, standing up for something that we believed in, and our elders showing us that it was important to fight. Can you share a little bit of what that experience fighting for your land meant to you? And how do you feel that sort of connection with what you call, I love that, these big phantom Indians? Like, can you talk a little bit about that experience?
There was a purpose for erasure and there is a purpose for continued erasure. Yeah. And so oftentimes when you think about, Native history, those are the depictions of us that we see. Leaders from just specific tribes, specific moments, and specific slices or interjections of history, right? But people are fluid and a moving constant. People who may not come from a desert like where I'm from and may not understand that even though it looks like there's no houses, buildings, or industry in those spaces, that there is an ecology, that there is a fragility about how these landscapes have held up over time and how critically important they are to not only the things that grow from them, but the people who thrive off of them. My people being one of them. Right. Because remember, federally recognized Indian tribes have a government-to-government relationship with the United States. Right. Now, that wasn't because the United States was like, oh yeah, they're tribes, so they're their own government. That was hard-fought, long earned, absolutely, and still going, right? And so because of this act of erasure, we often have to tell folks, we are a government of people. We are a nation of people with our own sovereignty that pre-exists the United States. And so if we are going to think about the promise of America and what it could mean, then that means that the people who have been quieted or disenfranchised, unfortunately have a little more stake in understanding these types of histories, because then it brings relevance to the other struggles that were present when a small group of people were electing to select power due to their manifest destiny ideals across a landscape built on the backs of others, using the resources of others, right, and trampling across the voices of others. And that is like a dynamic history. And for oral history, a very good story that people are interested in, but are not told.
Are not told and are not always comfortable with the reality of it when they are told.
Right.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more on Good Things.
Interested in the power of first-person storytelling? The Voice of Witness book series documents the oral histories of people directly impacted by and fighting against injustice. Each collection supports historically excluded communities to tell their own stories in their own words. The books feature a diversity of voices, including those of refugees and immigrants, incarcerated people, communities displaced from public housing, farm workers, Indigenous peoples, and more. These powerful stories highlight crucial issues and expose the impacts of harmful narratives and policies, laying the groundwork to build solidarity and movements for change. Voice of Witness books are read and used by thousands of educators, organizations, and advocates across the country each year. Visit voiceofwitness.org/read to learn more, access free resources, and get involved.
Hi, I'm Emily Deschanel.
And I'm Carla Gallo, and we're excited to tell you about Boneheads, our new Bones rewatch podcast.
I played Dr. Temperance Brennan.
And I played Daisy Wick, and we are going to watch from the very beginning.
We're going to watch the episodes. We're going to reminisce. We're going to laugh. We're going to cry. We're going to tell behind-the-scenes stories.
We're going to go on tangents.
A lot of tangents.
So whether you're a seasoned Bones fanatic or a newcomer looking to dip your toes in to the wild world of forensic anthropology, this show is for you.
Boneheads from Lemonada Media is out now wherever you get your podcasts.
So another big part of your story that I want us to get to is your attending Yale, because I know that, that was sort of in some ways like such a different world from the way that you grew up. And there's a quote that you have when you're talking about this and kind of noticing the difference between yourself and your peers. You say, "My suitemates had come to Yale to find themselves, to become adults. I knew what it was to be an adult. I'd been an adult for years. I'd seen what adulthood looked like. This was the first time I could be a kid. And by that, I mean, I could study. I could study everything I wanted to, and it was free." Can you talk a little bit more about like what that culture shock was like and how those differences kind of showed up for you?
Yeah, sure. So when I talk about being an adult, it's because, my community, especially in rural California, there's not a lot of economic capital here because they're working class towns, right?
Yeah.
And so that means that not only my community, but communities surrounding mine were living at, poverty levels that people around me couldn't even imagine. Right. And so when I went to Connecticut, it was the first time that I noticed, especially in the area that the students are, that there wasn't this conversation happening. And so it felt like a completely different place to me. I was like, whoa.
Sure.
To get to school, one of my mentors here on the reservation, she opened a new credit card to help me get my flight over so that I could be there.
Wow.
She felt so strongly in education that she opened that credit card, even though she had a family on her own.
Wow.
And, helped me to have a hotel room so I can check in the next day close to the university because I was going to Connecticut 3,000 miles away from my home by myself.
Right.
And so I went on my own, right? My mom and my grandma left me at the airport. I had $100 to my name.
Wow.
And so, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I don't know where this school is. I'm kind of like, I don't want to seem like not cool or, I was trying to like act tough. And so I was like, okay, I got it. I'm going to take a taxi from my hotel to where I have to go and then, go from there. And so I told the cab driver, I'm like, hey, I live on the 5th floor. Like, I know it's kind of a short ride, but I'll give you, $20 if you'll help me carry my things up. Right. And he was like, yeah, no problem. And so I get out of the taxi and I'm flooded by these volunteers that are like, oh, welcome to Yale. Happy. I'm like, can we help you? And they're like, freshmen, help, move in, all this stuff. Right. I'm still kind of weirded out because that just, it's different for me. Right. I was raised to pull my own weight in my community.
Sure.
We have different values. And I was like, no, I'm okay. We got it. You can help someone else. Like, cause that's a shared value in my community. Like, no, I'm good. Go ahead and help someone else. And so the cab driver, he walked me up the 5 flights of stairs, and I opened the door, and my suite mates and their families were there. And, what really made it awkward was not that part, but was the part where it was like, well, where are your parents?
Right.
And I was like, well, they're working. 'Cause like where I'm from, people can go to college by themselves. You know, they're 18, they're grown. You know, those types of things. And so that really kind of helped me think about like the cultural differences in that, like, you know, I was in a place where these young people were afforded a lifestyle where they didn't have to think about these things, right?
Right.
And so I had to go back to those teachings of, you know, being grateful for the opportunity to see these things. And I'm going to use my time to do everything I can to make it worthwhile.
Do you feel like as your time went on, did that shift when you maybe found people that you had more in common with, or were there pieces of it that helped you to feel comfortable in that setting?
It made me more strong and deliberate and intentional about being a Mojave woman. Instead of like trying to find my place, I just recognized that I was in a different space. And instead of aligning myself with the space to make the space feel comfortable with me, I just reminded the space that they invited me.
Right.
And so they need to be comfortable with me.
I like that.
And so that's a little bit, you know, that's a little bit different than most stories, because a lot of other folks, you know, they do a lot more in terms of seeking out places where they feel comfortable. I was just like, well, I've been uncomfortable my whole life. And so this might just be another piece of the pie.
Right.
And I might as well practice now, because when I do what I want to do, which is help to lift up my people, it's going to be a whole lot of uncomfort.
Okay, hold tight, everyone. We're going to take one more quick break, and we'll be back with more good things.
Want a sneak preview of hot new audiobooks? Then check out Your Next Listen, a new podcast from Lemonada Media and Simon & Schuster Audio. We've got everything: the hottest new thrillers, best-selling celebrity memoirs, and swoony romances. And these aren't tiny clips either. They're entire chapters you can listen to. Your Next Listen is out November 11th, wherever you get your podcasts.
Want more from your favorite Lemonada Media podcasts while supporting the shows that help make life suck less? Subscribe to Lemonada Premium today. As a subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive bonus content like never-before-heard interviews, behind-the-scenes moments, bonus episodes, and so much more. It's easy to sign up no matter what podcast app you use. On Apple, you can just click the Lemonada logo in the Apple Podcast app and hit subscribe. For all other podcast apps, head to lemonada.supportingcast.fm to subscribe. That's lemonada.supportingcast.fm.
You graduated, and in your oral history, you said, I remember being happy and feeling like I did something good, even though it was a bittersweet ending. I didn't have any big goals. We were happy, and we were away from all the bad stuff in my community, in my family, all the stuff that we had gone through. It kind of felt like my degree wasn't just mine, like it was all of ours. Can you talk a little bit about that, like about that sort of sense of this huge accomplishment belonging not just to you?
Yeah, I think that when I think of my degree, it really cements my understanding of my own family in terms of, like, my grandma, she's a survivor of termination and assimilation policy. So she was placed in internment for Indian children in camps. She was encamped and then sent to boarding school. And so, you know, in those places, they told her that being Mojave was not appropriate. Don't speak your language, cut your hair, be disciplined, do this. This is how you live. This is who you are. Like, from the time that she was like 5 to 7, could you imagine like a 5-year-old just being ripped from their family?
No.
And sent to a camp and then sent to a boarding school. And so when I think about my degree and it being a history degree in sovereign development, right? That really meant that I was able to give voice to the personal story that had been impacted by a few decision makers that decided that my community was a problem.
Right.
And so when I share my degree, I share it with my grandma who's a survivor. I share it with her parents and her aunties and her uncles who had to deal with the hurt of their children being stolen. I share it with my mom who had dreams of going to college and doing things. Instead, you know, because of poverty and because of the things that happened to our community to disenfranchise us, you know, had to find her own way out of a dark path to love a little girl, right? And I share it with my extended family, and they were all proud of me, just one person in our family, getting it to that place.
Absolutely.
It's also, in my story, a real reclamation of our power to say, look, yeah, you see this degree of mine as providing me a lens of validation or validity when I give talks, and you invite me to pretty spaces because I got that little badge on me that says I can enter this room, right?
Right.
But I already had that.
Right.
And I have a group of people behind me, my own people, who have been here, are from here, and will remain here.
Right. I love how you put that, because I think it shows that the goal here was never you needed to leave your community to get this. Like, you had the expertise that exists already in the community.
Mm-hmm.
The way that we privilege certain institutional knowledge and give it credence over what is literally, like, all of that you had before you went to Yale. It's a really interesting point, and one that we need, I think, a lot of people to hear. So thank you for saying it so plainly. But it also, I think, makes it clear that for you, it wasn't like, okay, and now you're going to decide to go home. Leaving was almost like the detour. The goal was always the community work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And trust and believe, my mentors at Yale, oh man, especially my strongest mentor, and I love him to death. I consider him a part of my family. Ooh, he was mad at me when I was like, I'm going home.
Really?
He was upset. He wanted me to stay. So I was in history, and one of the tracks was a law track, right? There's a lot of natives that go into federal Indian law. It's a very appropriate track. And for me, I started doing that, and I got accepted to a few places, and my mentor really wanted me to, you know, go to a specific place and even set up a meeting during my senior year with like the dean so that they could say, well, there are other options. You can defer.
Right.
You could do this. You could do that. And I'm sitting there like, out of respect, entertaining and being respectful in that type of setting, knowing full well I'm going back home.
Yeah.
And he thought it was the worst decision. I was throwing my whole life away. I had built this whole thing up to throw it away. He looked at it as me giving it up, and I looked at it as me going home.
Right.
And so he came back, actually. Yale asked me to support a Service Corps project or a volunteer-led project that goes to communities like mine and other communities across the globe to volunteer. One of the pieces of the volunteer program was that alumni were going to talk to members of my community, youth, high schoolers, about their experience, what they do getting into college, and, how they became a lawyer, just like basic like college talks, which I thought was like super helpful. And we're walking to the education center, just me and my mentor, and you can see the mountains surrounding my home and the broad open sky. And it was in October and it was beautiful weather, 90 degrees, and people knew me. They were saying hi. It was a different experience. And he looked at me. He was like, "You know what, kid? I get it. I was wrong. I get it. I see it now."
What an incredible full circle moment.
And I said, great, because I think he did hold that space where he thought that I could have been so much more. And sometimes when I talk to my own community members who are in college or other Native Americans who are in college, I remind them to listen internally about what is going to be most impactful for the time they have here for themselves and their people. And that might mean that you go to law school and you do all these big things in this other world. But it also might mean that you go home and you work in these spaces.
Right.
And that is okay too.
Right. And you say something at the end of your oral history that I think actually makes this point so beautifully. You say, in my work, I'm trying to put together a common thread to hold community together, to rebuild community. I meet a lot of people who are looking for a past. I'm looking for a future. I want to get to what that future looks like for you, for your community, for our democracy. I know that's a lot, but let's start with, for you, what does it feel like now? You have your oral history out in the world. It's making an impact. How does that feel? What has the response been like for you?
One of the things that has been helpful is when I do support those efforts to share oral history projects. I have met and engaged with a lot of Native people who have had a very hard time reconnecting with their past and don't understand what their place could be in for the future. And so that has been a really healthy experience from this project. But the one experience that scared me beyond measure was sharing my oral history with 20 Mojave high schoolers who found out that I was in a book and started a book club about how we go home. And I was like, oh my God. And my mentor here, the Mojave woman who opened that credit card, she called me. She's like, "Hey, Ash, our kids been reading How We Go Home. They just read your chapter. They want to know, can you meet with them?" Right. And for a whole week, I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, I felt so vulnerable, open, and exposed.
Sure.
What are they going to think? And so when I think about oral history, I had to, in a very real way, identify how I can be comfortable being as vulnerable as I could, especially with the stories that I wanted to share. Not so that it could be like a pathway for people not from my community to go in and see what it's like, but also so that maybe there's another Native student who feels lonely on a college campus and comes from a reservation and wants to go back home and do their work. Then I really had to come to terms with that. And, sharing this work definitely tested my gangster, especially with those 20 kids.
It brings me to what the final question I wanted to ask. And I wanted to close with a section that helps to start to wrap up your oral history. You say, the benefits of working for your tribe far outweigh any other job that you can imagine. You're a part of something that helps another little girl or boy keep building. By being there, being different, it's letting people know that it's okay to be Indian. It's okay to be educated. It's okay to know how non-tribal people live and to help us use those best practices to help us live better. And that doesn't mean that you've assimilated. It just means that you can speak someone else's language and you can translate it to a world that doesn't have quite as many interpreters, a world that doesn't have quite as many people listening from the outside. And I was struck by this section. I love the way you say that. But specifically because it's you working to reconcile different parts of your identity. It's your tribal identity and being educated outside of that community. What has it been like to reconcile those parts of you? And how do you see yourself sort of belonging to both of those worlds?
I think that sometimes when we think about reconciliation, we think about it as part of a healing process, but quite frankly, I don't want to be healed from that. It's not what I'm healing from.
Right.
And that's why when I talk about the work that I do, I talk about tribal nation building and not tribal nation rebuilding, because only in a system that wants our active erasure or seeks our systemic demise do they put us in a place where they think things can stay the same. And then we have to rebuild to that old place. I'm not reconciling two spaces of myself because I am those things.
Yes.
It has been so refreshing in 2024, especially since July, where people have tried to put women of color into these spaces in the United States, specifically one woman of color in particular, very credentialed woman of color,
yes,
and say, are you this or are you that? Are
right,
you that or are you? I'm all of it, baby. And now what? Right? Because those are all pieces of me, because this is part of the broader American story.
Right.
And if you can't get those concepts, then maybe it's not me who needs the reconciliation. Maybe it's you.
Right.
Maybe you need the mirror.
Right.
And so when I think about the bridge, I know that the bridge isn't just out. I know that the bridge can be in. And sometimes if I'm feeling extra, extra myself, then I remind people in my community, hey, we could close the bridge.
Right.
We can participate in that because we are a sovereign nation. And so we can think about, okay, if we want to participate and engage in that, we can. But we can also close off the bridge.
Right.
And we need to be mindful of what type of closures we're putting in. Now, sometimes because, we're fighting towards assimilation for just communities in general, like they want better for their families and they see other people having better for their families. So no, you don't want to live on the res. You don't want to live in the hood. You don't want to live in, this type of place, right? What if our land just got better?
Yeah.
And so for me, when I think about bridging, I think about bridging in a very different way, in that the value that I see is in the fabric of the community that I support. And the bridges that I make are not so much so that people can get out, but so that, we have places to walk in between.
That is absolutely beautiful. Thank you for spending this time today. I really, really appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, yes. Thanks for listening to Good Things. You can read Ashley's full story in the Voice of Witness book, How We Go Home, along with the powerful oral histories of 11 other Indigenous narrators fighting for justice. For more info about this storytelling project and others, including education resources and ways to take action, visit voiceofwitness.org and subscribe to the newsletter. This episode is created in partnership with Voice of Witness, an oral history nonprofit that advances human rights by amplifying the stories of people impacted by and fighting against injustice. To learn more, visit voiceofwitness.org. I'm your host, Maya Rupert. This series is produced by Hannah Boomershine and Lisa Fu. Our supervising producer is Muna Danish. Mixing and sound design by Noah Smith. Steve Nelson is our SVP of weekly content. Executive producers are Stephanie Whittles-Wax and Jessica Cordova-Kramer. Help others find our show by leaving us a rating and writing a review. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week. Follow Good Things wherever you get your podcasts and listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership.
Hi everyone, Gloria Riviera here, and we are back for another season of No One Is Coming to Save Us, a podcast about America's childcare crisis. This season, we're delving deep into 5 critical issues facing our country through the lens of childcare: poverty, mental health, housing, climate change, and the public school system. By exploring these connections, we aim to highlight that childcare is not an isolated issue, but one that influences all facets of American life. Season 4 of No One Is Coming to Save Us is out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you looking for ways to make your everyday life happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative? I'm Gretchen Rubin, the #1 best-selling author of The Happiness Project, bringing you fresh insights and practical solutions in the Happier with Gretchen Rubin podcast. My co-host and happiness guinea pig is my sister, Elizabeth Kraft.
That's me, Elizabeth Kraft, a TV writer and producer in Hollywood. Join us as we explore ideas and hacks about cultivating happiness and good habits.
Check out Happier with Gretchen Rubin from Lemonada Media.